Eugene, Oregon. I was 24 at the time, just me and my 2-year-old pit bull crammed into this clunky Fort Thief 2 haul filled with everything he owned. This was before I had a smartphone, just a basic flip phone with no GPS, and a thick stack of printed MapQuest directions in the passenger seat. It wasn't exactly the best setup for navigating unfamiliar roads, especially since cell service vanished completely in parts of the desert for what felt like entire lifetimes. Still, I was excited and determined to make this cross-country trip on my own terms somewhere deep in Central Texas. I realized I had made a bit of a miscalculation. My gas gauge was flirting with empty, and I hadn't seen another town exit or even a gas station for ages. Just as I was starting to panic and question my life decisions, this tinny little town popped up out of nowhere like a mirage. I didn't catch the name of it because I was too focused on getting to the pump. Before my truck sputtered out, it was one of those blink and you miss places, maybe 6 streets, total barely any signs, and quiet in a way that didn't feel entirely normal. I filled up at the pump, never even went inside the building, and figured I'd be back on the highway. You know, except I couldn't find the way back to the highway, and I don't mean like I got turned around once or twice. I circled that entire town 4 times each, lap-making member irritated and confused. I could literally see the highway from certain spots in town, but every road it took either looped me back or dented. Finally, I gave up and went into the gas station to ask someone, and that's when I met this lanky guy behind the counter. He had long, greasy black hair hanging in front of his face, and barely looked up from the magazine he was flipping through. He wasn't outwardly creepy, but something about him was just off. He spoke like it was wasting his time and gave me directions that made 0 sense. He told me to take some road that would get me back to the highway, but only after driving 17 mi out of town. I paused and said, "Wait, how is it 70 mi back? Didn't even drive that far together." But the just shrugged, mumbled something about the road curving around. Still not looking me in the eye, I left that store with my gut in absolute knots. The second I hit the parking lot, my hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key into the ignition, and the moment is it down in the truck, just started crying. There wasn't any one thing that guy had done that screamed danger, but everything in me knew something was wrong, whatever he wanted. Whether it was the stuff in the back of my truck or maybe something worse, I had no intention of finding out. The only problem was she. Waste the only person I'd seen in that town, and I had no idea how else I was going to get proper directions. That's when this beat-up red pickup rolled up to the station. The thing looked like it had been through several apocalypses, but the guy who stepped out was the living embodiment of a Texas stereotype: big broad flannel shirt, work boots, beard. Didn't hesitate. I ran up to him and asked if he knew how to get back to the highway. And maybe it was the desperation on my face or the fact that I was near tears, but he immediately gave me a smile and said he could help. It told me the Rewas tricky little turnoff hidden just past a short concrete tunnel, a spot he'd passed a few times without noticing. Apparently it tripped up travelers all the time because there were no proper signs and it blended into the landscape. Then he asked him, out of curiosity, "How far is it back to the highway?" He chuckled and said, "Oh, maybe a 4 mile. See, you can almost spot it from here." My stomach dropped, so I told him the directions that the guy at the station had given me, and his whole face changed. He stared at me for a second, and then quietly asked how I even knew about that route. I told him the clerk gave it to me. He was quiet for a moment, then asked if I had a proper map. Unfortunately, I only had MapQuest printouts, which weren't helpful in this weird little place. He went back to his truck, pulled out a weathered old map of the area, and spread it out on the hood. He traced the route. He'd been sure enough it veered away from the town, leading deep into nowhere. He told me that roadled about 17 mi into the desert and just ended nothing there except a scattering of trailers, rusted out cars, and a small group of sketchy families who were known in the area for drug problems, and worse, that gas station guy. Apparently he lived out there. I'll never forget. The way Texas, that's what I call him, in my head, looked at me when he said I'd been smart to trust my instincts and not God on that road. To this day, I don't know exactly what that man's intentions were, but now they weren't good. He was just a young woman alone with a truck full of stuff and no cell signal. And it still chills me to think how easily that story could have ended differently, but instead, it got lucky. I may tack in stranger with a rusty truck and a warm heart who helped me find my way and never got this name, but I'll always remember him as Texas, my roadside angel in flannel. This happened quite a few years back. Maybe when he was around 20 or soon. Of my best friends had invited me to tag along with his family on a little road trip that ended with a concert just across the border. The plan was pretty laid-back: drive during the day, then pull into campsites at night and crash in their camper van. Nothing fancy, just good company, music, and a break from the usual routine. Our first night on the road, we hadn't even crossed the border yet when we rolled into a cozy little campground that sat right next to a beach. It had that calm family vacation kind of parked in neat row skids running around earlier in the day, and not ha sketchy soul in sight, so naturally well let her guard down without thinking twice about it after dinner. While everyone was settling in for bed, I decided, tossed a pout for some air and clear my head. You've always loved being near the water, and since the camper was basically parked right next to the shoreline, I figured a quick walk wouldn't hurt as I strolled down toward the beach. It passed this old wooden shack, one of those little storage buildings you see near the water. Didn't think anything of it at the time, just made a mental note of it in case I needed a landmark on the way back. I kicked off my shoes, stood where the waves could hover my feet, and let myself zone out for a bit. Under the moonlight off in the distance is a waggai. Standing further down the beach, it was a public spot, so I didn't think much of it. Probably another camper, out enjoying the quiet like me. Eventually, I figured it was time to head back. And that's when things started to feel off. That man who'd been standing on the beach earlier gone. But the weird part was when it got closer to the shack. Again, it could swear as a someone trying to duck behind it, like they didn't want Met to notice them. Instantly, my brain kicked into high alert. Didn't want to panic, but he wasn't about to pretend everything was fine. I quickly called a friend. Dick knew would be awake and started talking really loudly, dropping hints like, "Yeah, his you'll meet you near the camper in 5." I gave it that shack a huge amount of space as I kept walking, making sure whoever was there knew I wasn't clueless or alone. He made it back safely, locked the camper door behind me, and climbed into bed trying to shake off the unease. I didn't say anything to my friend or his family, because honestly I figured it could have been something harmless, maybe a drunk tourist, maybe someone just being weird. Either way, I pushed it out of my mind and enjoyed the rest of the trip like nothing happened. Fast forward about a year later, he was hanging out with that same friend, reminiscing about the trip when that weird beach moment suddenly popped into my head. He casually brought it up, kind of laughing about how creeped out he'd been, but AC was stalking and honest. He got really quiet. Then he told me something I hadn't heard before. Apparently, a few months after the trip, his younger brother had mentioned something strange at breakfast one day the same night. They came back from the beach. His brother had woken up in the middle of the night to grab some water. Asha passed by the camper's window. I saw a man standing right outside staring, and the guy bolted as soon as she realized he'd been seen. But it definitely freaked him out. We both sat there in silence for a bit, realizing how much worse that night could have turned out. Whoever was hiding near the beach shack might have actually followed me back to the camper. I still don't know what he wanted, and honestly I don't want to know, but it makes me really grateful I trusted my gut and didn't go back quietly that night. I think about it more than I'd like to admit. So this happened a couple summers back when my boyfriend and I were heading home after a weekend camping trip deep in the back country of British Columbia. We were on one of those long, bumpy forestry roads, like an hour or so from any paved highway. And since we'd camped out there plenty of times before we knew the area, pretty well usually the only people you're into that far out are either other campers in lifted trucks or guys driving logging rigs. It was a gorgeous day, clear skies, warm air, that perfect summer afternoon glow, and we were just cruising along when we spotted this guy suddenly stepping out of the trees ahead of us and waving us down like it was an emergency. That instantly caught us off guard, because it's not every day you see someone appear from the woods in the middle of nowhere without any sign of a vehicle. We slowed the truck and came to us as my boyfriend rolled down the window to see what this guy wanted. He looked off. He had on this thick flannel work jacket, which made no sense considering how warm it was, plus these dusty tan pants and beat-up boots. He had kind of wild unkempt hair, big old glasses, and this pale kind of gaunt face. He looked like someone you'd expect to see fixing a fence post, not walking out of the woods like a ghost. They told us his car battery had it and asked if we could give him a jump on the surface. It sounded like a reasonable request, but the way he spoke, it was slow and too calm, almost like he was reading a script. Definitely made both of you uneasy. Still would try to be decent people, especially that far out where help is hard to come by. So we said we'd help him. Mentioned his car was just a bit further up down this side trail that was completely overgrown. As she started walking ahead, we followed behind in the truck, kind of joking to each other that this could totally be the start of a horror movie, but under the humor webuth were actually one deej after maybe 150 meter down this tight brush-covered path. We rolled into a small clearing we never would have seen if he hadn't shown us sure enough. There was a dusty old be-edged and parked their way too delicate, looking for those rough roads, with the trunk open and a blanket kind of tossed over the back, like it was hiding something. The hood was already up, which was weird, but my boyfriend got out and grabbed the jumper cables while I quietly slid into the driver's seat. Just in case. I didn't want to overreact, but something about the whole setup felt wrong. Even glanced around for anything it could grab us a weapon if I needed to. The guy kept talking to my boyfriend in this awkward, forced, friendly tone. mentioning somebody who had supposedly been fishing with him but took off earlier, which didn't make a ton of sense. He just stood there while my boyfriend did all the work like he was waiting for something. Eventually, my boyfriend had to remind him to get in his car and turn the key, which he did. And yeah, the engine started, he hopped back out and thanked us, but his tone was oddly intense, like he was trying really hard to act normal but not pulling it off. My boyfriend didn't even bother properly putting the cables away. He just got in the truck, and as soon as she shut the door, it threw wide in reverse and backed the heck out of the with branches scraping along both sides of the truck. When we got back to the main road, he exhaled for the first time in what felt like forever as we drove away. My boyfriend told me the guy had just stood there resolutely watching us the entire time as we backed out. And sure, maybe he was just a weird dude with a dead battery and some social awkwardness, but neither of us saw any fishing gear near the car, and the whole thing felt too strange to be just a coincidence. I still get that pit in the stomach feeling when I think about how isolated that spot was. I honestly think the only reason nothing bad happened was because we both stayed sharp and didn't give him the chance to catch us off guard. Sometimes trusting your gut makes all the difference. This happened to me back in the fall of 2020, right in the middle of the whole pandemic craziness. My buddy, let's just call him Jay, and you were making a road trip from New York to Michigan to take care of some flooring jobs and maybe check out a couple houses we were thinking of. Flipping, we had loaded up his work truck, a sturdy Ford F-150, and decided we'd hit the road at night to beat the traffic and get there by morning. We were driving through Pennsylvania. And if you've ever been on those winding mountain highways out there, especially I-80, you know it's no joke. Just endless curves, narrow lanes, and steep drop-offs. If you mess up, he was the one driving while Jay tried to get some sleep in around midnight, or so I pulled into a service plaza to fill up and grab a few snacks. There weren't many people around, just one other car, a few pumps over a dish. SUV, maybe a Suzuki or something close. I didn't pay much attention, just noticed it and moved on. Fast forward about 30 minutes, and I'm back on the highway, doing a solid 90 in the left lane, when I see headlights creeping up behind you. At first I didn't think twice about it. But after a few minutes I realized it was the same SUV from the gas station, and something about that started to bother me. To test the hunches, slowed down to around 70, expecting the SUV to pass, but instead it dropped speed right along with me. That's when I nudged Jay awake and told him I thought we were being followed. He perked up immediately. This guy used to be in the army, so he's wired to pick up on shady behavior fast without missing anything. Bitha says, yeah, his that guy at the gas station too. He gave you a word look when you walked by him. Jay tells me to switch lanes, so I do, and the SUV switches right with me. Then he says, all right, pull over. Let's see what he does. So I slow to a crawl and roll onto the shoulder. Sure enough, the guy actually stops behind us at that point. Jay is like, yeah, this dude's got a gun or something. He's way too bold for this to be nothing. Jay tells Meadow Punchitan going to seem accelerating. He's roomaging through the cab, grabbing whatever could be used as a weapon, hatchet, machete, couple pocket nibs, nothing too crazy, but enough to put up a fight if it came down to it. Jay had this idea. He wanted Meta break, check the guy, make him crash, and then we jump out with the blades and confront him. But once the guy hadn't made a move yet, and he wasn't ready to escalate unless we had to. Instead, Jay grabs a big held spotlight from the back of the truck and opens there a window, aims it at the SUV and flips it on. We were hoping to catch a glimpse of the driver, but the front windows were tinted way too dark to see through his swerved lanes, and told Jay to hit him with the light again from the side. That time, for just a few seconds, we got a full look. It was only away from their heads. That meant walking would be no simple deal and waste tech cash on a cab. Classic mistake. A driver near the entrance offered, you saw I debut something about him was wrong, so we politely declined and set off on foot. Three clearly out of place guys dragging rolling suitcases through a rude part of town, like we were asking to rob barely a newt into the walk. This woman who looked strung out started following us, stalking fast and asking for money, offering a good time. If we went with her, we tried brushing her off and sped up, but the situation just kept getting sketchier. A few steps later, we noticed three guys wearing bandanas trailing us, not saying anything, just staying behind. You stay stead. I distanced west, stopped to adjust her luggage, and sodded they. That was the moment my stomach tightened. We were being hunted, plain and simple. Right as things were escalating, the woman came back even more aggressive, still pushing the same weird deal. Thankfully, a massive bouncer from a nearby strip club saw the situation unfold and shouted at her to back off. Another guy who clearly knew her stepped in to argue with the bouncer, and things started to get loud in the chaos. A security officer from the bus station must have caught sight of us, because he came over and basic all, I told us, what the hell were you thinking walking around here at night? had pointed out how we looked like walking targets, and yeah, he wasn't wrong. The security guy walked us back toward the station and told us to take a cab this time. No exceptions. The only problem, the same cab driver we had originally turned down was still parked out front, and the officer told him to take us. These conned we got in the cart. That uneasy feeling came rushing back. He took a weird drought, hit the gas hard, and started mumbling to himself under his breath, like he was having a conversation with someone who wasn't there. When noticed, he locked all the doors with a button on. The dash hand weren't sure if we were being kidnapped or just driven around by someone. Unhing told him a couple of times that the hotel was in the other direction, but he ignored us when he finally pulled up to the hotel. He stopped and just stared straight ahead for a moment, breathing hard. Then, without looking at us, she said in this calm but creepy voice, "Why didn't you get in the car earlier?" Something wrong with the way I look? It was clear he was pissed. We rejected his offer at first. We tried to explain we just thought the walk would be quicker and didn't know the area well. We paid. The fare gave him 8-cent tip just to avoid any drama and practically sprinted to the hotel doors, but before we made it inside it earned back. And there he was standing outside his car just staring to us like we owed him something now. Words, nodes, movement, just that cold stare inside the hotel. Things didn't get better. It was sketchy. Webb barricaded the door and none of us slept more than an hour. We switched hotels the very next morning and agreed that no matter where we go in the future, if it involves Atlanta or Greyhound, it's a hard pass from Olive. US back in nearly 2016, I was 23 and living in this quiet little spot up in northern New Mexico. That weekend he'd driven Salop to Boulder, Colorado to see a friend and unwind. It's a long drive, but he'd done it a bunch of times before, so the distance didn't bother me much. Plus the desert landscape always made for a scenic where things were smooth the whole way back, until he stopped in a town called Alamosa to grab gas. That's the last real town before you're back in no man's land for almost 90 miles with nothing around but dirt roads scattered, trailers and high desert terrain. It was just getting dark when I pulled out of the gas station, and almost immediately I noticed this older blue sedan pull out too, and end up behind me on the highway. Didn't think much of it at first, but after a few minutes you realized they were riding way too close. For comfort I figured maybe they were in a hurry and would pass me soon, but they didn't. Is speed up a bit, and so did they. Is slowed down, and they slowed down. It was creepy how perfectly in sync they were with my speed, and for a second I wondered if it might be a cop waiting to catch me's lip. So I decided to pull off at this little convenience store in Antonieta, thinking, okay, if it's a cop, they'll stop and talk to me. The car pulled over, two parked right behind me, but nobody got out. I sat there completely still, trying to act like I wasn't about to have a panic attack. After a few minutes of silence and no movement from them, I decided to hit the road again, hoping maybe they'd get bored, but nope, they pulled out right behind me, still tailing me. Like it was a game. I had about an hour left to go, and the highway was just getting darker and lonelier by the time I crossed into New Mexico. Any hope I had that this was just some harmless misunderstanding was gone. My gut told me loud and clear, this was not okay. The worst part, my phone was practically useless. It was one of those older phones that only worked when connected to Wi-Fi, and I was deep in an area known for being sketchy. Especially out on the Thames. Of people talk about weird stuff happening out there, lights in the sky, people going missing, you know me. And now I was being followed through it with no way to call for help. I was so shaken up that I totally missed the turn that led to the long dirt road home. Luckily, I remembered this little wisteria off the highway that was usually lit up and had a few people around. So I pulled in, hoping this car would either keep driving or finally stop. And of course they pulled in right behind me. At this point it was scared. Butte also seriously pissed, so I decided to just walk up to the driver and figure out what the hell was going on. And when the window rolled down, it was totally thrown behind the wheel was this average-looking middle-aged woman. I don't know what I was expecting, but it sure wasn't that. I asked her why she'd been following me for nearly 90 miles, and she gave me this weird excuse about thinking her daughter had just stared at her like, lady, what? My car had plates from a different state, was covered in bright, weird bumper stickers, and looked nothing like something you'd mistake for your kids. Also, wouldn't you call your daughter if you were really that confused? None of it made sense. And honestly, the more she talked, the creepier it felt. I chewed her out and drove off again, thinking that would finally be the end of it. But when it earned off onto the dirt road that leads to my house, she turned into us. The brakes jumped out and told her very clearly that this wasn't a public road. There was another way out, and it was dangerous to get lost out there in the dark. She just kept apologizing in that same soft tone, but when I got back in my car and started driving again, she kept following me. Was so close to home at that point, and I just kept hoping my boyfriend would be there. As soon as it pulled into the driveway she pulled into, parked, and got out of her car, she started walking toward me, asking if she could crash at our place for the night because she was too tired to keep driving. I started yelling at her to leave, and right as the noise picked up, my boyfriend came out onto the porch. When she saw him, she stopped in her tracks, turned around, and basically sprinted back to her car. She took off without saying another says or houses, just open fields. As far as you could see, the gas station we just left seemed to be the last trace of civilization, an event. The road ahead looked like something out of a horror movie. After about 5 or 6 miles of driving through this eerie emptiness, the GPS told me to make a right onto some tiny road that barely looked like it was used. No painted lines, no street name signs, and just a couple of scattered houses along the way, though none of them looked like anyone had lived in them for years. The vibes were seriously off. I made a joke to me friend, something like, "This feels like where you'd run into," and swoozing just the abbreviation, "if you know, you know." He immediately shot back with, "Dude, don't even say that," and laughed, but we didn't see them until they were literally right in front of us, just rusty metal and graffiti covered train cars sitting there in complete silence. There weren't no flashing lights, no gate arms, no even a single sound. The thing looked abandoned, like it hadn't moved in years. My headlights barely lit it up, but the little is a was enough to make both of us freeze. That's when my friend said my name really quietly, like he was trying not to freak me out, but we were already both freaking out. It felt like we weren't supposed to be there, or like we had slipped into a place that wasn't real. There was no way to go forward, and there definitely wasn't a path around, so I threw the car in reverse, spun around through the grass, and floored it back down the highway, doing like 80 until we reached the gas station. We'd stopped 8 earlier once we got there, and finally started to breathe again. We just sat in silence for a few minutes, trying to make sense of what just happened. We pulled up the GPS again, and just like that, it rerouted back to the interstate like nothing ever happened. No sign of that sketchy back road, no mention of a railroad crossing, no reason for why we were ever taken that way. And the thing is, the train wasn't just broken down recently. The wheels were corroded. The whole thing looked like it had been rusting in that spot for years. Why would the bus send us to a dead end? Like, the more I think about it, the more it messes with me. From the second we left that gas station to the moment we came back, it all felt fake, like we weren't really there.